It's a little terrifying because you absolutely cannot miss.
Goalies now are completely at a premium.
Not, right? Like, Canada doesn't have a ton of great options.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hockey News Big Show. I'm your host, Katie Gaus, joined by my co-host, Michael Traikos and Ryan Kennedy. And guys, today is the Big 5-0, our 50th episode of the Big Show. Kind of feels like it flew by, but very exciting. Plenty more episodes to come, obviously, as we head down the stretch. We've had lots of fun, lots of mispronounced names, and we will have plenty more of those as we go. Not pointing any fingers or anything.
Got that all out of my system, Caddy. Okay.
Yeah, he's perfect. He's fine. See, he's figured it out. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about rising to the occasion. So the battle for first in the Atlantic Division continues to take the spotlight. It is by far the tightest and probably the most interesting race to be keeping an eye on as we head down the final stretch of the regular season. So I want to start off by making your case for who needs first place the most of the three teams that are in the mix. Who needs it most before we get into who we think will win it? So who needs this?
I don't know how you argue against Toronto not needing it just because they need all the help they can get. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right.
Well, all I would say is the way things are currently shaping up in the wild card, like if Toronto won the division, they would have to play either Ottawa or maybe Montreal in the first round. And like those teams, just like the fact that they are natural rivals, I almost worry that would be like a horrible trap for the Leafs. Whereas at least with Tampa Bay, they're like, okay, we know who we're playing. I'm actually going to say Florida needs it the most because you know that you're going to be without Aaron Ekblad for the first two games of the playoffs because of his suspension.
Right.
And you're also trying to get healthy, whether it's Tkachuk or, Brad Marchand, like, substantial players. I feel it would be nice for Florida to be able to ease in a little bit with a wild card team versus somebody like Tampa or Toronto who are immediately going to be at their throats.
That's a good point you make about Florida needing the break. I almost think that Florida just doesn't care. Like if you were to ask, like Ryan, if you ask Matthew Tkachuk, who do you want to play? Do you think he'd actually say like, oh, we need an easy opponent? Like he's like, I don't care. We'll beat anyone in the league. And I feel like that's kind of Florida's mantra. Whereas Toronto, it's like, I was sort of joking, but not really joking. Like they do need all the help they can get in the playoffs. And whether that's home ice advantage, whether that's a lesser opponent. And I hear what you're saying about Ottawa, but regular season against Ottawa versus playoffs against Ottawa, I think it's a different story. It's kind of like regular season against the Bruins for the Leafs and then the playoffs. So I'll say Toronto, like until I'm blue in the face, just because they need to get past the first round and any advantage will help them.
Quick sidebar before we get into who we think ultimately will get that spot. You just mentioned Matthew Tkachuk and who he would want to play. Do you think he would want to play Brady or no? Like, because I know we would love to see it, but I'm honestly thinking about it now. I'm like, does he want to play his brother in the first round? Wouldn't he maybe want to see his brother get a chance to win and move on? And they meet later? I'm so confused now.
Yeah, maybe you make a good point. Like I think if someone's gonna knock him out or knock the Senators out, I don't think Matthew wants to be the guy to do that. Like, I know there's that rivalry, but he really does love his brother. And I think he wants to see his brother have the same sort of team success that he's had now with the Florida Panthers in back-to-back years. I don't know. How do you feel, Ryan?
I feel that it would be like the end of A League of Their Own, where Matthew Tkachuk plays Gina Davis and Brady is Lori Petty. I'll leave it at that.
Really going back on that one.
Oh, yeah. My favorite analogy.
It's perfect.
All right.
Let's talk real quick then. Who do we think is our pick to actually earn the top spot? Who's, needing it aside? Who do we think is going to get it?
I kind of like the way the Toronto Maple Leafs are playing. Like, notwithstanding, Ryan brings this up all the time. They can't play teams that are below them in the standings. Like, they just lay eggs all the time. So against Nashville Predators, they had arguably like their worst game, probably since the Four Nations easily. They're going to be playing the Philadelphia Flyers, on the day that we're recording this. And, there's probably alarm bells going off going like, okay, treat this one seriously, guys. I know it's the Flyers. I know they're kind of, since the trade deadline, they've been like arguably the worst team in hockey, but this is one of those trap games. But,
Yeah.
notwithstanding that, like against Colorado, I thought Toronto, well, they pulled one out and they've been playing really good hockey. Against the Rangers, I thought they played well.
Yeah.
So I think they're only a couple points back of the Panthers. I'll say Toronto gets it.
Okay. All right.
I actually saw a forecast this morning that in terms of, advanced stats or, breaking down the numbers or whatnot, that they had Tampa Bay as a slight favorite to win the division. And I don't know why I didn't think that was a possibility because, I mean, it's the Lightning. They've been a very good team for years now. And the race is super tight between those three squads. So I'm going to go Tampa Bay just because we have not talked about them winning the division this year.
Yeah, they almost got passed by Ottawa like a couple weeks ago. We were talking about all right, are they in danger of being a wild card team? But I see your point, Ryan. Like they're playing good hockey. What is it, like a 4-point gap as we're recording this? Like it's not much that they're back of the first spot.
Yeah, and it might be a strength of schedule matter. I haven't looked at who the Bolts are playing down the road, but maybe they have an easier schedule than Florida and Toronto.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy that there's a 4-point swing between the first three teams. So
yeah, both Toronto and Tampa do have a game in hand on Florida as well, which always evens itself out. But they're an interesting one. I feel like the Bolts are hungry and they're kind of like they're just kind of like flying under the radar a little bit, even though they are so talented and so skilled. Yeah. So we'll have to see what they can pull out. All right. Big news coming out of Columbus. The Blue Jackets announced on Monday they activated Sean Monahan and Erik Gubranson off the IR. This was just in time for a huge matchup with the Islanders. So Columbus wins in a controversial shootout after the game could have been over. We'll talk about that in a second, but it was a massive point. So how do these additions, especially Monahan in particular, change the way you feel about maybe the Blue Jackets still having a chance of fighting for that spot, of finding a way to get into the playoffs? What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, it's like I want the Blue Jackets to make it because they've been such a great story all year and they have been that underdog. And, they have the legacy of Johnny Gaudreau sort of powering them. But I just worry that it's been it's too late at this point. Like they're going to run out of real estate. Yeah. Monahan was amazing for them in the first half before he got hurt. Right. But again, they went on a pretty bad slide before that Islanders victory. Yeah. And things are pretty tight in the East. Like that wild card, it feels like Ottawa's basically locked up the one spot.
Right.
And then you got Montreal that's got they've got a little bit of wiggle room, and those Islanders themselves are in the mix and the Rangers. So I'm just worried that it's, if Monahan had come back like a week or two ago, maybe that would have been the difference. But I mean, it's an injury. There's nothing you can do about it.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel the same way as you, Ryan. Like I want Columbus, but then I'm looking at it. It's almost like the battle, like the greater New York teams, like the Islanders and the Rangers are battling it out with like the greater Montreal teams in Montreal and Ottawa. And selfishly, I would love to see two extra Canadian teams get added to the playoff mix because it's always a lot more fun and a lot more excitement, at least north of the border, when you have more Canadian teams. So, whether it's Toronto possibly playing Ottawa in the first round and then maybe a second round opponent with Montreal, I think a lot of Canadian fans would love that. But I'm with you. Like I'm looking at the standings and they're so tight, and it does feel like Columbus, now that they've played 70 games, like they have 12 games to get into the playoffs. It sounds like a lot, but then you've got to leap past like 3 teams to do it.
Right. Yeah, because it's not just you winning. It's always, what are the people above you doing? And it's these 2 New York teams that just refuse to die. And I mean, they still have to get to Montreal, who's continued to stay pretty hot. So, all right, bonus question real quick for both of you. The Isles disallowed game-winning goal by Palmieri. Goalie interference or not?
I say goalie interference.
Ooh.
Yeah, and here's like at the GM meetings last week, they went over this. This is basically a checklist. Like, was there deliberate or incidental contact? Was it in the blue paint or outside? And the goalie have a chance to reset? I would say that it was deliberate contact. I think Palmieri purposely bumps into him. I think it was right on the fringe of the blue paint. And I don't believe the goalie had a chance to reset because it was like 1.5 seconds later, if that. So I know it wasn't like he didn't knock him over. It's not like the helmet came dislodged or anything, but contact is contact in my mind.
Ooh, yeah, I'm going to respectfully disagree there.
Good.
And for me, I thought he had a chance to reset. And I would say I don't think he needed to shove Palmieri, which, there was the contact from Palmieri, and then there was kind of shoving Palmieri out. But he still got, his glove back in time. And granted, we're talking, half a second or a second.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
it's not
So fast.
much, but to me, the letter of the law, I think he did have time to reset, and therefore, I thought it would have been a good goal. But as people have pointed out, because it was called no goal on the ice, it was harder for, the war room to overturn it.
Well, and we got
that is the main factor. Like whatever the call on the ice is, it really is hard to overturn it sometimes.
We got a great quote after the game from Patrick Waugh saying, "If Toronto is afraid to overturn calls on the ice, we don't need Toronto." And you can always count on Patty for some great fireworks. You could see it was boiling up. He was not happy, and certainly it was a pivotal thing. These are important points at this time of the year, but at the end of the day, we know this. It's been kind of a tale as old as time. Whatever the call on the ice is, you really have to make a strong case if you're going to try to get that overturned. All right, let's talk about some players that have been hot since the Four Nations break. Here are the top 5 scoring leaders in the NHL. Since Four Nations, we've got Roope Hintz at 21 points, Crosby at 20, along with Nick Suzuki also at 20. You got Robert Thomas and Connor McDavid both at 19. So during this stretch with those points leaders, who has been the MVP for their team the most during this impressive run?
I'll go Nick Suzuki with Montreal. He has been everything that they have required. That top line is really singing with Caulfield and Slavkovsky. And, he's a two-way guy. I think Suzuki has always been, to me, like more of a 1B center rather than your Barkov, your Matthews, your McDavid. But since the Four Nations, he has been that guy where, other teams are going to have to say, like, look out for Nick Suzuki, and I think that's been a great step for him. Whether he can maintain that over the long term, I think remains to be seen. But this has been an incredibly positive stretch for the Habs. And, if they can make the playoffs, Suzuki is going to be one of the main reasons and has been since the Four Nations break.
Well, we're seeing the evolution of a player becoming basically Patrice Bergeron, or at least that version of a player. And it's great to see. I agree with you, Ryan. I always question whether he's a number one center or not. But, if Bergeron can be a number one center and win a Selke, I would say Suzuki is kind of following that same path. And I like that answer. I'll go in the West, and I'll go with the Blues and Robert Thomas. The Blues are on a 6-game winning streak. They're in a wild card spot as we're talking right now. And really, it hasn't just been Robert Thomas. Like Jordan Kyrou, 11 points in the last 6 games. Braden Shen has got 7 points in 6 games. Combined, those guys have put up something like 45 or more points since the Four Nations. So they're really getting it from their 3 core forwards. And, similar to Montreal, the Blues are in a playoff mix, and it wouldn't be happening without without Robert Thomas and him leading that charge.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. I think for that kind of an answer, you could obviously talk about what Sidney Crosby is doing at his age, but at the end of the day, it's about a team. These two teams are both fighting for something a little bit more, and those guys are fueling it. So both good answers. All right. Well, word out in Edmonton is that McDavid and Draisaitl are both unlikely to play in any of the 3 games coming up for the Oilers this week. So we saw a great article on THN talking about this, but can the Oilers prove they are more than a 2-man team? Because this is their chance to do it. What do you think, Michael?
I think for sure. And it's a real great opportunity for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to step up, or you should say continue to step up. Like he's got 9 points in the last 4 games. 2 years ago, this guy was a 100-point player. First time in his career, only time in his career where he was a point per game or more player. And, this year and last year, I'd say he's taken a step back and hasn't been as productive, but definitely with Draisaitl and McDavid out, I think it's a great chance for Nuge to remind people, hey, I was a number 1 overall pick. I can be that guy that is leaned on, and I think the Oilers are going to need him.
Here's a question then. Let me phrase it to you this way, Ryan, for your response. How much does the way that they respond to playing without them during this little stretch influence the way you feel about the Oilers maybe in the postseason? Do they need to prove something to you, or is there something that you want to see? Like, will this be really crucial?
It's going to be interesting because they have Dallas, a game that they will be an underdog in. And then they have Seattle, a game they'll be favored in. And they already beat Seattle, without McDavid and Draisaitl. So I don't know, because with the Oilers, for me, the big questions aren't like offense. It's like goaltending and defense.
Okay.
So I think it is good for other guys to step up. But I also feel like I don't know if we're going to learn anything other than, as Mike pointed out, Nugent Hopkins, taking on a bigger role. And it's kind of funny, when I was watching that Seattle game the other night, I was thinking, like, man, the Nuge must have like PTSD from like when he was first an Oiler and there was like nobody around him.
Yeah.
He's like Jeff Skinner, like, Victor Arvidsson not producing, like, oh no, like I remember this. I remember being at an all-star game asking Nugent Hopkins if he was going to talk to some of the other players about what it was like going through bad times, because at that point in his career he had only known bad seasons. I was like, are you going to talk to like Tavares or like Crosby about like when things are bad for them? He was like, yeah, it's good to be around those guys. So anyways, kind of reminded me of that. But structurally I don't think, they need the points, but I think we know pretty much what their forwards are capable of.
That's fair. All right, well, let's talk about Montreal. We mentioned them a little bit in the run that they're on. They may be getting defenseman. Is it Kaiden Guhle or Guhle? I feel like I've heard
I'll step right in here. It's Guhle.
Guhle. Okay, that's it. All right, Ryan.
It's Guhle.
Guhle. Okay, perfect. So Kaiden Guhle, I should have stuck with my gut. That's what I was going with. Never trust Michael. All right, so he's traveling with the team. They're on a 4-game road trip out of the non-contact jersey and seems poised to be making a return. Obviously, he would be a nice boost, but their D is kind of rolling right now. So if he comes in, who do the Canadiens take out, Ryan?
For me, I would go with Arber Xhekaj, simply because he's the most limited in terms of his skill set on the back end. Yeah. Obviously, he brings them a great physical element, and he'll drop the gloves whenever he needs to, sometimes when he doesn't need to. But down the stretch, if getting 2 points is the most important thing, and you believe Guhle will help you in that regard, then I think Xhekaj has to take a back seat. He has been in the minors a good deal in his young career. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, you're bringing in a lefty, so you imagine you're going to take out a lefty. And, I don't think you're touching the Jaden Struble, Lane Hudson combo.
Yeah.
That pairing has just been so good. And Struble, another guy that no one really talks about, like he's only 23 years old, and, he's putting up good numbers, obviously alongside Hudson, but maybe kind of the forgotten guy there. I talked to our Montreal Canadiens site publisher, Corinne Haynes, about this, and she actually thought that you keep Xhekaj in because you're going to be playing the Blues, and it's a bigger physical team. And she actually's been thinking that Savard hasn't looked good down the stretch. And I know that would require taking out a right-handed shot and bringing in, basically having 2 lefties on your third pairing. But she really thinks that he's been struggling and looking kind of slow down the stretch. Maybe that's why he didn't get moved at the deadline. But for what it's worth, I think it's probably one of those 2 guys. Like Ryan said, Xhekaj is probably the obvious one, but maybe it's a chance to kind of give some load management to a guy like David Savard.
I like it. Yeah, you make good points, and I think for sure with the way Hudson's been playing, you really don't want to mess with that pairing. So we'll see what happens if they get Guhle, not Gully, and not Guhle back in their lineup. Well, the Pittsburgh Penguins are 5-3-2 in their last 10, and this recent run has moved them up to 25th in the NHL, tied at 69, I think, with Boston. So this moves them out of a potential top 5 pick with where they're sitting right now. Has this hot streak, if we call it that, especially fueled by Tristan Jarry, actually done more harm than good for the Penguins? Who, again, we know Crosby is such a competitor, but big picture, is this is probably not what we want to be seeing, right?
Well, yeah, and that's the rub with any team that has Sidney Crosby on it, is that they're never going to be too bad because he is still such an impactful player in the NHL. I guess the only thing you can really say is like, yeah, like you don't want to have a losing culture. So you want to keep going and pushing till the end. I'll also say, they could win the lottery, right? They could still pick number one, even though their odds are slipping.
Sure.
And it is sort of an interesting draft where there's like a grouping of sort of 4 or 5 guys right at the top that are all kind of interchangeable. But it is kind of funny how the 1 year where it was like, okay, well, they're definitely not making the playoffs, so they can finally get a really high pick, and then all of a sudden they go on a mini heater is kind of funny.
Yeah, this is the worst thing that could happen to the Penguins, honestly. And what do you expect? Like Crosby's not going to pack it in. He's too proud of a player, and he's playing. Like, what was the stat I just saw? Like most 5-on-5 points, I think, since the Four Nations, or even this year. I don't know how far
he's about to break the points per game record. I believe he has a chance to do it tonight as we're recording this here on Tuesday. I mean, 37. He is.
Which is not great, but it's also like, why are you doing it? Like Pittsburgh needs a top 10 pick. They haven't had a top 10 pick since 2012 when they got Derek Pouliot. They haven't had a top 5 pick, I think, since Jordan Staal. Like, how long ago was that? Like, are we talking like 2007, 2006? Like,
it was like Katie middle school type times.
It was 20 years since they've had a top 5 pick. They need a top 5 pick. So, they might not win the draft lottery, but they need to be in a spot where at least they're picking within the first 5 or 6 spots. I don't know much about the draft, but what I do know is, your chances increase when you're in the top 5.
All right. Well, speaking of Pittsburgh, their head coach is one of a few that could very much be in the hot seat or hunting for a job this off season. We've seen a couple coaches that have just had tough years at the helm. So the list I want to throw out to you guys is we've got Laviolette with the Rangers. Obviously, if they miss the playoffs, that's big. Not good. Mike Sullivan's name has kind of been thrown around throughout the year. Joe Sacco in Boston, things not going well there. Lindy Ruff, again, Buffalo, continuing to fall short. And then Andrew Brunette with the Nashville team that's just been a confusing mess mostly all season. So which team needs to make a change in their head coaching department the most?
Can we say all of the above?
I mean, they all have cases for it.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if all those teams have a new coach next season. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sullivan ends up in Boston where, his son-in-law is probably their future captain, and Charlie McAvoy.
Yeah.
But, the name I'll throw out there is Lindy Ruff. Like, he signed a 2-year deal. So, going into next season, he's going to be in that lame duck scenario. It also means that if you did have to pivot, you're only wasting 1 year of salary for this guy. I would love it if they did a situation where he joins Kevin Adams up in the front office and they find like a Gerard Gallant or someone else who, has a track record of just getting you in the playoffs and then leaving town, either on a taxi or just at the side of the road. But that's my pick.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Andrew Brunette. Nashville coming into the season, I mean, we thought they would be a pretty good squad, right? And it wasn't a matter of like, oh, their young guys are getting great. It's like, no, they went out and got Stamkos and Marchessault and Brady Shea. Like, this was supposed to be a team in the thick of the Central Division race, and it completely fell apart right from the beginning. So I think, if you're GM Barry Trotz, you have to look at it and say, like, I know these guys can play hockey. I know Roman Josi is a top flight defenseman. I know UC Saros is a great regular season goaltender. So you have to say, like, okay, well, what was the difference? And I think, unfortunately, Andrew Brunette might have to be the fall guy there. I will also quickly point out that Laviolette could very well get fired in New York, but if I'm the Rangers, is it more prudent to fire Chris Drury, the GM, before he fires Laviolette?
How about Laviolette to Nashville? Trotz, he's got a track record, Laviolette in Nashville.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure he's been there before. Like, that's how bad the NHL is with recycling.
It's never a bad idea. Hold on. It is a bad idea to recycle coaches.
Well, Yeah, there's no question in my mind though that there are a few of these guys that if they do leave the teams they're getting fired from, will pop right back up on one of the others. That's just
it's a good
the
list of
nature
coaches
of
when
it.
you're
It
looking at
is.
it. Like
I mean,
Laviolette,
like Sullivan's
Sullivan,
excellent. Yeah.
Lindy Ruff, even Brunette. Like, was he not a Jack Adams finalist or winner like a couple years ago?
Yeah. I mean, he did great. He did great
The
work
curse
with
of the Jack
Florida.
Adams.
Oh
Mm.
yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see. Somebody's definitely going to be looking at the help wanted ads. Okay. Speculation has been circling for a little while now, connecting Gavin McKenna, the consensus #1 pick for the 2026 draft, to the University of Michigan. McKenna, just ridiculous numbers: 129 points in 56 games with Medicine Hat in the WHL. Rumor on the street is Michigan could be offering him something upwards of $100,000 or more per year just to join the team. This is getting out of control, but not from a hockey standpoint, not from a college standpoint, and that whole issue. Let's talk a little bit about how McKenna making this move would reshape the way that juniors and maybe the CHL in general would look. I'm going to kick it off with you, Ryan.
Well, this would certainly take this new landscape to another phase, because right now CHL teams are like, this is great. Like, we're getting all this new talent from kids that are, still committed to the
Yeah.
NCAA. We love this. It's win-win. But if you lose one of your guys before
that
he
guy.
is, in the NHL, I think it's going to change how some of these CHL teams feel. What I will say, there's nothing they can do about it, right? Because it's not like a contract, like it's not like a transfer agreement. If you go from the USHL to the CHL or vice versa, like technically Gavin McKenna would just be going to school at the University of Michigan and, playing hockey. Like, they don't have an agreement with the NCAA. So there's no compensation there. But what I would think is, the CHL, we've already heard that there's a possibility of them going to 3 European imports next year or in the near future.
Okay.
One thing that a lot of people have pointed out, sort of the insiders that I talked to, is right now 16-year-old Europeans are not eligible for the CHL. You have to be at least turning 17. So do they change that rule in order to get some of the more, sort of phenom types from Europe to come over? I think the import one is important too, but I also wonder, will we see more exceptional status designations where, you're saying to a player like, hey, you can play high level hockey when you're 15, we'll make a spot for you. And then at least you're getting that extra season on the front end of the talent. Whereas you might say like, hey, we might lose these kids to the NCAA, even if they are going to be high NHL draft picks, even if they do a year there. I think there's going to be some sort of shuffling of priorities in the CHL to guard against losing players of that caliber earlier than expected.
That's an interesting point about, maybe more kids get exceptional status. And I think that's probably the more logical fallout of this. And, with McKenna, he's such a, he's a unicorn. Like, it's not like every year you're going to get a guy who's putting up this amount of production. Like, you're talking, Katie, like this is going back to like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby kind of territory where this guy is generational. I wonder, like, obviously he just wants a challenge. So CHL is not providing a challenge. I don't know if Michigan is going to provide a challenge, but it will provide him a weight room and maybe fewer games where he can work on the other stuff.
Different development.
Yeah, like I'm surprised we haven't seen more players do what Austin Matthews did and like go off to Europe.
True.
Obviously, he thought the college route was going to be too easy. He thought the major junior route was going to be easy, so he went off to Zurich and played in the Swiss league. And he got paid. It was a challenge. He's playing against men, and then came into the NHL and was just we know the rest, but it doesn't look like a lot of players have the appetite to do that. But I like what Ryan's mentioning, is give more exceptional status to the kids who deserve it or, want it. And then you see them put maybe 1 or 2 years and then they skedaddle.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, there are a million different trickle down effects that this is, the potential that it could have. We could see more people taking notice of it, taking initiative with it. The NCAA is going to have their hands full too, because I think they made this rule switch without figuring out some of the, the details behind the scenes in terms of, eligibility and transcripts. And I hear about that on a daily basis here at home. So certainly a lot of things that are going to have to change, and we'll see how it all plays out. Well, hockey players, if you want to get a new stick but don't feel like dropping a fortune on it, you can snag a pro-level composite stick at Stix.com. That's Stix.com. Make sure you go on there and check them out. They also have some cool promotions every day, something new. All right, let's get into some rapid fire. So we know the NCAA ice hockey tournament begins on Thursday. Top 4 teams are number 1, Boston College, number 2, Michigan State, number 3, Maine, and number 4, Western Michigan. Is the national champion in that top 4? Who is your pick? And if it's not in that group, tell us who it is. Michael?
I'm going to go Boston College. What they lost to Denver in the championship last year. They've got arguably the best line in hockey and college hockey, and Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, and James Higgins. They also got a heck of a goalie in Jacob Fowler, who's one more year now. He's played there, and just ridiculous stats. So it's not an interesting pick because it is the number 1 seed.
Number 1.
Yeah.
Hey, sometimes it is what it is. They are definitely stacked. What do you think, Ryan?
I'm going to go Michigan State, another top team. So, same with Mike. I'm not being exciting here, but, you sort of go chalk. What I like about the Spartans is they're a bit older. Some of their more important players, like Carson Dorwart, is going to be an NCAA college free agent, and then you do have those high end NHL talents like Isaac Howard, who might win the Hobey Baker, and you have a goalie in Trey Augustine, who we have seen him on the international stage, with those back-to-back World Junior gold medals. He was so crucial to Team USA there. So he has that experience. And it just feels like the Spartans have been building towards this moment under Coach Adam Nightingale during his short tenure in East Lansing.
I like it. I mean, with these top 4, you've got good choices. Personally, I think it would be awesome to see Maine get back, even if they just get back to the national championship. That program has taken such strides from, where it was back in 93 to kind of getting back into that top tier again. But I'm really curious to see what Western Michigan does. They won the NCHC for the first time this year. I know that league in general wasn't maybe as strong as it has been in years past, but the style of hockey that they play in the NCHC, I'll be interested to see how it matches up, because they do have a little bit more physicality, a little bit more grit maybe than a team like Michigan State or BC might. So that's kind of my sneaky pick, is I got to keep an eye on Western Michigan. All right. Well, the Washington Capitals signed defenseman Jakob Chychrun to an 8-year extension at $9 million AAV. Big money for the D-man. He's certainly proving that he's earned it. So we like it. Good or bad deal? What do we think?
I think it's a good deal. You got John Carlson, who's, getting older. He's not going to be with the Capitals forever. So this is almost like you're getting your replacement. And with the salary cap going up, $9 million, as Ryan likes to say, is not what it used to be. So I like this deal. As long as Chychrun can show that he can stay healthy for those 8 years, I don't think the Capitals are going to have any issues with this.
Nope.
I think it was like a little expensive. I would have been more comfortable with like 8 times 8, but he has been so good for them this year that he certainly deserves the big ticket. And, you are getting him for his prime NHL years. So, for a Caps team that is going for it, and it'll be interesting to see what they're like next year as well with some of their rising players. I think it is good to lock him down long term.
Does Ottawa have any buyer's remorse about this now? Like having trade, like what did they get? They got a Nick Jensen and a 3rd-round pick for Chychrun.
Yeah,
looking like Washington won this deal.
Ottawa shouldn't have traded for him in the first place. Like they weren't ready to have a player like Chychrun. Like if they had traded for him this year, it would have been amazing.
Yeah,
but they weren't ready.
Who knows? everywhere they play always seems to be a little bit different with players and their success. All right, well, we talked earlier about Gavin McKenna and how he closed out his draft -1 season with those crazy stats, 129 points in 56 games. He had 26 points in his last 6 games. This is crazy. So I saw a stat that says over the past 40 years, Sidney Crosby is the only CHL player to score more in a D1 season. So could McKenna be the best prospect since Sidney Crosby? Just speculating.
I'm going to say no, because Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews
Totally
are in
fair.
that category. And
Yeah.
I still think there's another. I don't know. Maybe I'll be wrong about this, but
Well, it's a
Connor
prospect.
McDavid, I
It's hard
think,
to
is
know.
even as a prospect. Like McDavid was like, I would say he's the best prospect since Eric Lindros. That's where I go. So
Okay.
I would say no.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards no, because McDavid got hurt in a fight when he was in junior, so he missed some games.
It's crazy to hear that.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's probably the last time he did it.
You sure? Yeah, exactly. He
Yeah,
learned
he
his
was like,
lesson.
"Oh, maybe breaking my hand is not a good idea."
Never mind.
It's weird because when we think of it in context, is like Connor McDavid wasn't Connor McDavid like until he was. You know, it's like when he came up and people are saying he was the next Crosby. I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, well, come on, he's Sidney Crosby. Like, how can make that comparison? It's like, well, eventually players get into that. You know, it's like Cale Makar. We're now talking about him in the same stratosphere as Bobby Orr. And I'm sure that's like, you know, crazy for a lot of Bobby Orr fans, but it's like, well, I mean, somebody has to take over the reins, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the only thing I would say is McKenna's a winger and not a center, and they don't have as much of an impact overall. But also, having said that, like this kid is so smart and so talented that he makes a tremendous impact no matter where he lines up on the ice.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. Certainly it will be interesting. Again, you don't know until they get to the big show and we see what they can do. All right, well, Emily Kaplan reported that billionaire Dan Friedkin had gotten into the mix as an ownership option focused on bringing the NHL to Houston. Big push for this. So yay or nay on the thoughts of NHL in Houston? What do we think about it?
Big yay. Big yay. It's happening. I don't think it's
Feels
even
that
like
way.
a question anymore.
Yeah.
Houston's getting a team. I imagine Atlanta's also getting a team.
Again.
You know, throw one in the throw one in the Atlantic, throw the other one in the Central. I guess Houston would be in the Central.
Yeah.
Atlanta would be in the Atlantic, and then, you know, where are we at with our standings? Do we still need 2 more teams? Are we good?
Yeah,
now?
I mean, we're getting our numbers are getting weird, but it is what it is. It feels inevitable.
Kansas City will be in there somewhere. I don't know.
A return to Arizona maybe at some point. Yeah.
There we go. Now you got your next 4 teams.
Well, Gary Bettman's never going to leave until he gets hockey back in the desert.
That's right. I say yay. I mean, Houston is a massive TV market. It's a massive market in general in terms of population. They do have hockey history there. Gordie Howe played for the Arrows back in the day. Yeah. But I will make one point of clarification. The first mention of Dan Friedkin was in Money and Power way back in January.
Whoa,
I'm sure Emily's a big-time reader. So, yeah, nobody pumps our tires. I'm going Roberto Luongo on this one. Nobody pumps our tires. So I'm going to do it myself.
Tweet it. Call it out.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, Dan Friedkin, also interesting guy. Not only is he into sports ownership, but he also owns a company that produced Killers of the Flower Moon, the Martin Scorsese film. So, fun fact of the day for you there. He's a Renaissance
long
man.
movie.
Never saw it.
I didn't watch it because it's a long movie, but I heard it was
very long movie, like 3.5 hours long.
The only 3.5-hour movie that I'll watch is the third Lord of the Rings movie, and I saw that more times than I care to admit publicly, but it's all right. Everybody's got that nerd in them. All right. Yeah. The refs robbed us of a goalie fight between Darcy Kemper of the Kings and Jeremy Swayman of the Bruins. Michael, I saw you wrote about this as well. Yes or no? Should the refs be trying to stop these goalie fights? Because I know they want to probably protect maybe from injuries, or they just don't want the goalies to fight. I don't know. It brings me back to when Marc-Andre Fleury was mic'd up and he wanted to fight Binnington. He's like, it'll be fun. No, come on, let it happen. And they wouldn't. So what's going on? Yes or no? Why is this happening?
I have to say yes. Like refs should stop it just because it's a goalie, right? Like you don't want your
I
goalie getting
know.
hurt. Like if you remember Brent Johnson, like I think he
Oh.
broke DiPietro's face, and
His
then
orbital
DiPietro
bone,
also
I
had
think.
like a
Crazy.
knee injury, like after getting like one punched with a hook in a game way back when.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's the fear, is that I know Swayman doesn't have much to play for right now, but the LA Kings do, and Darcy
Denver sure
Kemper
does, yeah.
probably shouldn't get hurt right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say no, as long as both goalies are really into it. Like we have seen goalie fights in the past where you could tell one of the guys was like not into it and just kind of
Yeah.
felt like he had to. But
Yeah.
if they're like both charging at each other, meeting at center ice, and they both want to do it, they're consenting adults, and we all like to see it.
Yeah, like those fights against Ray Emery back in the days, like no
Right.
one wanted that. Like forget
No.
about the goalies, the
That's
players didn't even want to fight them.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants that smoke. All right. Well, we love to see it. We understand why they don't want it. And if you're a Kings fan, you're probably happy it didn't happen. All right, guys. Well, great show. Episode 50 in the books. That does it for the Hockey News Big Show. Make sure, as always, to follow us on social media. Stay up to date on everything we've got going on. And on Friday, we will have our top 8 contenders. We'll see if anybody's list continues to change. But for Michael Traikos and Ryan Kennedy, I'm Katie Gaus. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.